Hello, my name is Derek Colbert, and for my capstone paper, I decided to do the war on drugs and how its policies caused a disproportionate representation of black people in the criminal justice system. Okay, so for my first section, I did the literature review. In that, um, my first point was the disproportionality of drug arrests of African Americans. In this section, it discusses and summarizes the existing research on the disproportionality of drug arrests. Some of the findings include um, blacks being 3.73 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana possession than whites, even though they use at the same rates. And also, um, blacks make up around 14% of drug users, and of those, 37% are arrested, and of those 37%, 56 are incarcerated. My next section for my literature review was the disproportionate representation of African Americans in prisons due to the war on drugs. Now, this one also summarizes the disproportionate representation of African Americans in prison. And the findings for this research, they found that blacks and are offenders, and blacks that are offenders at similar rates as whites, but are at a higher risk of being arrested for drug offenses. And then the final section for my literature review was the harmful side effects the war on drugs has had on the African American community. This one discusses the harmful side effects the war on drugs policies has, and these findings include the the shrinking of the Fourth Amendment due to marijuana related search and seizures. And then finally, my last section for my literature review was the gaps in previous literature, which most of these they touch on disproportionality and the factors that cause it. However, many of them fail to make any recommendations or the recommendations that are needed to eliminate or greatly reduce the disproportionality of drug arrests and incarcerations. Um, so, my next section for my capstone paper was the perspective, needs, and positions. In this one, I discussed the different perspective, needs, and positions between African Americans and law enforcement, because those are the two groups that my recommendations will be affecting the most. So for the first group, African Americans, um, their needs, um, their need of resources, opportunities, and upward mobility. Many African Americans uh, live in disadvantaged communities with little resources and opportunity to progress into a more um, into a higher socioeconomic status. The next one is perspectives. They have from their perspective, there's a high distrust in law enforcement, and that's largely due to just a history of police brutality and mistreatment by the law. A lot of that brought on by laws being used to suppress African Americans, such as Jim Crow, segregation, and even now the war on drugs. And then lastly, their position is a position of struggle. Um, from kind of their point of view, they have always had to struggle to gain their rights, just to be ordered to be considered as regular citizens and to obtain equal treatment. I mean, a lot of that you can just look at the American history, especially specifically the civil rights movement, and all the police brutality and struggle that African Americans had to go through in order to get the rights that we have now today. Next, we go to the perspective, needs, and positions of law enforcement. Now, for law enforcement, they view themselves as the thin blue line. They see themselves as the last line of defense between criminals and law-abiding citizens. And then their needs, they need a trust from society. In today's society, because recording devices are easily accessible, you just pull out your phone and hit record and be able to record anything you want. This has led to more police conduct being viewed by the community, and a lot of times police are caught doing less than favorable actions, which has led to a lot of scrutiny by the public. And then lastly, their position is that of a protector. They are protectors and guardians, and that is their duty, their main duty for the public. Okay, so my final section for my capstone paper was the proposals. For my first proposal, I proposed a policy change, and that policy change would be to end the drug prohibition. Reason being that prohibition exacerbates the drug market, and the implementation of the war on drugs policies has affected African Americans at disproportionate rates. Next, the issues being addressed with this new policy change are the disproportional drug arrests and incarcerations, as well as reducing the amount of disparity in enforcing drug laws. And then the description of the proposed policy would be just ending the drug prohibition. In order to do this, we would need to go through legislative means, so that would be making new constitutional laws. Issues with this would be the political process and lobbyists. Interests of corporations and other groups would provide opposition to those in favor of ending prohibition, so it would make this new policy change difficult. Not impossible, but very difficult. And then to evaluate this plan, ideally there would be a longitudinal study along with measuring drug arrest and incarceration records, so that in order to measure effectiveness. Okay, next is a strategic plan, which is a second proposal. For this one would be implementing rehabilitation for drug abusers and diversion programs. Reason being, many drug offenders get very little treatment while they're incarcerated, and this will allow them to be able to get the treatment that they need, and that way that they can go back into society and become productive members. Now, the issues being addressed with this strategic plan would be the treatment of drug abusers in state and federal prisons. The description of this proposed policy, there would be a focus on rehabilitation instead of incarceration. All prisons would provide drug abuse counseling and support groups along with any medical treatment that is needed. In order to implement this plan, again, we would need to go through legislation means, creation of new laws for state and federal prisons that state and federal prisons must follow in regard to rehabilitation of drug offenders. There would also need to be policy changes, creation of new policy changes that require state and federal prisons to provide rehabilitation and treatment options for drug offenders. And then there will also be diversion programs, more of a focus on diversion programs and creating more diversion programs to provide alternative options to incarceration to help prevent prison overcrowding, and then as well as provide treatment outside of prison. And then the implementation issues with this second proposal would be lobbyists in private prisons, the interests of the private prisons, and lobbyists would provide opposition to the strategy. And then to evaluate this plan, collecting data on offenders that have gone through the programs and measuring recidivism rates along with the employment status and income would help us measure the effectiveness of this new strategy. Then the last proposal would be a specific program. This one would be community policing and the demilitarization of police. Police today resemble more of an occupying force than they do police officers. The issues being addressed with this new program would be the disproportionate representation of law enforcement in disadvantaged communities, as well as police enforcement being concentrated in more urban and disadvantaged communities versus suburban communities that are not disadvantaged. The description of this proposed policy would be changing law enforcement duties and procedures to be more community oriented. In order to implement this new program, law enforcement would need to go through a demilitarization process, and then they would also need to go through training that focuses on community policing. This would train officers to collaborate with the community in fighting crime. And then issues that would arise from trying to implement this new program would be largely opposition from police departments. And the reason why there would be a whole lot of opposition from police departments is that a lot of times police departments do not like to change. They are used to a certain style of policing characteristic of that department, and it's really hard to get police departments to change into something that they're not very comfortable with or don't know much about. And then the evaluation for this plan would be a surveying different communities on their level of trust in the police, and then measuring drug arrests in order to measure disparity. And then these are my references that I use for my capstone paper. And that is it. I hope you enjoy my presentation, and hope you guys all have a great end of the semester. Thank you.